Have you ever noticed that the person who speaks the most rarely says the most meaningful things? That the one brimming with confidence is often the most disconnected from truth? Today, we pull back the curtain on a dangerous psychological theater, a stage where illusion triumphs over substance, and the loudest minds often mask the emptiest thoughts. This is not just a social flaw. It's a slow-burning catastrophe, one that shapes institutions, collapses cultures, and blinds entire generations. What we're about to explore is not merely a critique of the foolish, it's a survival guide for the thoughtful. There is a kind of ignorance that wears a mask. It doesn't look like absence. It doesn't even sound like uncertainty. It speaks with conviction. It walks with certainty. It takes the stage, commands attention, and rarely questions itself. This form of ignorance is not passive. It is active, aggressive, and infectious. The man who doesn't know but believes he does is far more dangerous than the man who admits he is still learning. The former builds systems. The latter quietly studies them. The world, however, tends to elevate the builder. The illusion of competence is one of the most powerful forces in human society. It's not rooted in reality. It's rooted in belief. And belief, as history shows, is rarely tethered to what is true. A man can walk into a room with little knowledge but great charisma and leave with followers. Another man can walk in with years of understanding and leave unheard. Why? Because we don't listen with discernment. We listen with longing for simplicity, direction, certainty. And the false prophet, the confident fool, is always eager to provide it. But let's be clear. The problem isn't just that ignorance exists. The real danger is that ignorance doesn't know it's ignorant. The blind man who thinks he sees will not ask for a guide. The unskilled mind, unaware of its limitations, will overestimate its reach. And without correction, which it resists, it begins to lead others into its delusion. This is not new. Long before modern psychology gave it a name, this pattern was observed by thinkers who watched kingdoms fall and tyrants rise, who saw charlatans gain followers while sages were cast aside. The voice of ignorance is not just loud, it is confident. Not because it has earned clarity, but because it has never faced complexity. It mistakes noise for insight. It confuses certainty with truth. And worst of all, it does not hesitate. Where the wise man says, "Let me consider," the fool declares, "I know." And in a culture addicted to speed, addicted to answers, the fool becomes king not for his depth, but for his performance. We reward the surface. We worship appearances. The polished sentence, the commanding voice, the posture of control, these become symbols of wisdom in a world too distracted to investigate their substance. And so, confidence, regardless of its foundation, replaces competence. What results is a society that confuses sound with insight, certainty with intelligence, boldness with merit. There's a strange irony here. The more a person learns, the more hesitant they become. Not because they know less, but because they've seen how much remains unknown. The man who has walked through the labyrinth of thought does not emerge shouting. He emerges reflecting. He knows that every conclusion is provisional, that understanding is layered, that easy answers are often false. But this kind of intellectual humility is not dramatic. It does not sell. It does not go viral. And so, it is often invisible. Meanwhile, the fool thrives in visibility. He dominates discourse not through insight, but through repetition. He echoes what others want to hear. He offers clarity even where there is none. He simplifies the complex and gives shape to the vague. And because people crave the comfort of certainty more than the rigor of truth, they follow him. They do not question his conclusions, they adopt them. not because they are convinced, but because they are relieved. The wise man, by contrast, walks a quieter path. He questions himself constantly. He doubts not out of weakness, but out of discipline. He understands that reality is not a stage, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, the ego is stripped bare. This is not a pleasant process. It is painful. It is humiliating, but it is necessary, because truth does not come to the proud. It humbles you before it frees you. Most people never endure this process. They stop at the first sign of discomfort. They protect their ideas like sacred relics, refusing to test them, afraid they might not survive scrutiny. And so, they remain trapped in a loop of self-confirmation. They curate their echo chambers. They follow those who flatter their assumptions, and they mistake the volume of agreement for the weight of truth. The truly intelligent person is not the one with all the answers, it is the one with the best questions. And he does not ask them to impress others. He asks them to refine himself, because he understands that wisdom is not something you present. It's something you pursue, silently, relentlessly, and often alone. But what happens when those who question remain silent, and those who assume speak the loudest? What happens when leadership is performed rather than earned? You get systems built on illusion, institutions led by actors, policies shaped not by reality, but by what appears decisive. And when failure arrives, as it always does, it is not analyzed, it is spun. The illusion must be preserved. The show must go on. This is how empires erode not from outside attack, but from internal delusion. When correction is treated as hostility, when caution is seen as hesitation, when questions are mocked instead of explored, decline becomes inevitable, and those capable of steering the ship retreat, unwilling to play the role of the fool just to be heard. They whisper truths in private while the crowd cheers for spectacle. Here lies the greatest tragedy. The more thoughtful you are, the harder it is to be heard, not because your ideas lack power, but because they lack simplicity. And in a world addicted to speed, complexity is an inconvenience. But the wise do not trade truth for applause. They speak when needed, not when wanted. They do not interrupt the noise with more noise. They wait for the silence. The difference between the fool and the wise is not just in what they know, it's in how they handle what they don't. The fool denies his ignorance, the wise embrace it. The fool sees uncertainty as weakness. The wise see it as the beginning of learning. The fool needs to appear strong. The wise need only to become stronger. And in this difference lies everything. To become wise is to die to the self-image of already knowing. It is to be broken again and again by the weight of reality. It is to walk through the fires of your own error and come out changed, quieter, sharper, not because you've mastered truth, but because you've learned how little mastery is possible. But the fool avoids this fire. He senses its heat and turns away. He would rather be adored than transformed. He surrounds himself with comfort, with flatterers who reinforce his illusions, with men who never challenge him. He doesn't grow, he expands his ego instead, and the larger it grows, the more fragile it becomes, the more aggressive he gets when it's threatened, because deep down beneath the show he knows he has built nothing real. True intelligence begins where certainty ends, and those who seek it must be willing to suffer for it. They must invite contradiction, welcome challenge, and surrender ego, not just once, but constantly. Because intelligence is not a static achievement, it is a constant war against delusion, a war that is often lost the moment we think we've won it. In this way, wisdom does not walk the same road as popularity. It does not compete with spectacle. It watches, it listens, it prepares, and when it speaks, it does so with the weight of earned silence behind every word. This is why in the end, the fool may rise faster, but the wise endure longer. The fool may gather crowds, but the wise build foundations. The fool may trend, but the wise transform. And though history forgets many of the truly thoughtful, their ideas outlive the noise. Their truths remain when the illusions collapse. If you want to see clearly in a world addicted to performance, you must first be willing to see through yourself. You must trade the comfort of false clarity for the discomfort of honest complexity. You must leave behind the need to be impressive and embrace the need to become aware. That journey is slow, it is lonely, but it is the only path to real power. Not the power to control others, but the power to see clearly, to think independently, to speak truth without needing applause. In a world where the fool is often center stage, your task is not to shout louder, it is to become deeper, to resist the theater, to master the truth. The journey into true wisdom is not merely a path of acquiring knowledge, but an unrelenting confrontation with one's own limitations. Every great thinker in history, every profound soul who changed the trajectory of human understanding, carried with them a deep and abiding awareness of their own ignorance. This acknowledgement was not a mark of weakness. It was the very foundation upon which they built their intellectual empires. To walk this road is to embrace the paradox that the more you know, the more you realize how little you actually understand. This is why arrogance is the enemy of progress. When the mind is closed by the certainty of its own ideas, it ceases to grow. It becomes a tomb rather than a garden. Ideas once vibrant and alive become stagnant, and stagnation in any form is death. The truly wise never allow themselves to settle into comfortable absolutes, because those absolutes, no matter how beautiful they appear, are illusions in disguise. We live in a world obsessed with speed, with answers, with the rapid consumption of information. This has created a fertile ground for the illusion of knowledge to flourish. The flood of data available at our fingertips has given many the mistaken belief that information equals understanding. But information is just noise without the filter of critical thought. It is the difference between hearing 1,000 voices and listening to one that truly matters. The mind that seeks wisdom must develop the ability to sift through this noise to recognize not just what is said, but what is left unsaid, not just the arguments presented, but the assumptions that underpin them. This demands patience, a quality increasingly rare in a culture fixated on immediacy, patience to dwell in uncertainty, to resist the urge to leap toward premature conclusions, to entertain doubt without succumbing to despair. Doubt is not the enemy of knowledge, it is its crucible. It is through doubt that ideas are tested, refined, and strengthened. The fool fears doubt because it threatens his fragile certainty. The wise embrace it because it is the gateway to deeper truth. To live in this tension between knowing and not knowing is to live at the edge of intellectual possibility. It is to remain alive to the endless unfolding of reality rather than collapsing into the comfort of finality. Yet, this tension is often misunderstood as paralysis or indecision. Many mistake the wise man's caution for weakness or lack of conviction. They demand black and white answers, not shades of gray. They want a leader who commands, not one who questions. This is a dangerous dynamic because it elevates those who perform certainty over those who embody it. It is the stage of illusion triumphing over substance. Consider the social and political spheres where this phenomenon plays out with devastating consequences. The loudest voices are often those least prepared to lead. They offer simple solutions to complex problems, ignoring nuance in favor of slogans. They appeal to emotions, not reason, and feed on fear rather than hope. Their confidence is a performance, a mask that hides the absence of depth. but the damage goes beyond failed policies or poor governance. It erodes the very fabric of public discourse. It teaches a generation that knowledge is a performance to be faked rather than a pursuit to be undertaken. It incentivizes superficiality and punishes complexity, and it diminishes the space for genuine learning and growth. The wise person's role in such a world is not to engage in the noise with louder noise, but to embody a different kind of presence, one marked by quiet confidence, deep listening, and persistent inquiry. This presence does not seek to dominate conversations, but to elevate them. It does not demand applause, but earns respect. And it understands that influence built on true understanding is slow and often invisible. We must also consider the internal battle that accompanies this external challenge. The struggle between the desire to be recognized and the commitment to remain authentic is a crucible in itself. To be wise is to accept that true recognition often comes from a place of solitude and integrity, not from the applause of crowds. It requires a steady rejection of the shortcuts offered by charisma and spectacle. This internal conflict is one of the great tests of character. It separates those who pursue wisdom for its own sake from those who seek it as a means to status or power. The former walk a lonely path, often misunderstood and uncelebrated. The latter find quick fame but shallow fulfillment. The tension between these paths is a reflection of the broader human condition, the choice between depth and appearance, between substance and show. But wisdom also demands courage, courage to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world around us, courage to dismantle illusions even when they provide comfort or identity, courage to stand against prevailing trends, to question authority, and to endure isolation. This courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. In many ways, the cultivation of wisdom is an act of rebellion against the dominant culture. It resists the simplification of complexity and the reduction of knowledge to sound bites. It refuses to sacrifice depth for the fleeting rewards of popularity. It challenges us to live with integrity in a world that often rewards compromise. Moreover, the pursuit of wisdom is a lifelong process. There is no final destination, no summit where one can declare mastery. Instead, it is a continuous unfolding, an endless dialogue between what we know and what we have yet to learn. This process requires humility, the recognition that every answer opens up new questions, every certainty invites new doubts. This humility is not defeatist. It is the source of resilience and creativity. It keeps the mind open and adaptable, allowing us to navigate the complexities of life with greater grace. It fosters empathy, enabling us to understand perspectives different from our own. And it cultivates patience, teaching us that growth often happens in the spaces between action and understanding. It is important to remember that wisdom is not a solitary achievement. It is cultivated in relationship with ideas, with others, and with the world. It requires dialogue, challenge, and collaboration. It thrives in communities that value truth over comfort, inquiry over dogma, and depth over spectacle. Yet, such communities are rare. Our modern world often prioritizes individual achievement over collective understanding, speed over reflection, and entertainment over education. This makes the cultivation of wisdom all the more urgent and necessary. It calls us to create spaces where thoughtfulness is nurtured and complexity is welcomed. As we confront the challenges of our time's social, environmental, technological, the need for wisdom becomes undeniable. Complex problems demand nuanced thinking, long, term vision and ethical clarity. They require leaders and citizens who can resist the allure of easy answers and embrace the hard work of understanding. In this light, the contrast between the fool and the wise is not just a personal distinction, it is a societal imperative. The future depends on whether we can cultivate a culture that values depth, questions certainty, and honors the difficult path of learning. This means education must go beyond the mere transmission of facts. It must teach critical thinking, intellectual humility, and the courage to face uncertainty. It must encourage students not just to memorize answers, but to ask meaningful questions. It must foster curiosity and resilience, preparing individuals to navigate a world that is constantly changing and often confusing. Furthermore, wisdom calls us to reconsider the way we measure success. In a society obsessed with metrics, grades, and accolades, we must find ways to honor qualities like insight, empathy, and patience. We must create incentives for deep engagement rather than superficial achievement. Only then can we hope to cultivate a generation capable of thinking deeply and acting wisely. At the heart of this transformation is a simple truth: wisdom is a practice, not a possession. It is a commitment to living thoughtfully, questioning relentlessly, and acting ethically. It is a daily discipline that requires attention, reflection, and courage. And so, the choice before us is clear. We can continue down the path of spectacle and illusion, rewarding those who perform certainty and punishing those who embody it. Or we can choose to cultivate wisdom in ourselves, in our communities, and in our institutions. We can embrace the discomfort of complexity and the uncertainty of learning. We can honor the silent strength of humility and the quiet power of inquiry. The path of wisdom is not easy. It demands sacrifice, patience, and courage. But it is the only path that leads to true understanding and lasting impact. In a world hungry for answers but starved for insight, it is the light that can guide us through the darkness. As you consider your own journey, ask yourself, are you willing to see through your own illusions? Are you ready to question what you think you know? Are you prepared to listen, to learn, and to grow even when it is difficult? If the answer is yes, then you have already begun the most important work of your life. You have stepped onto the path of wisdom, a path that leads not to easy answers, but to deeper truth, not to fleeting applause, but to enduring understanding. Remember, the fool may rise quickly, but only the wise endure. The fool may dominate the moment, but the wise shape the future. The fool may entertain the crowd, but the wise transform the world. In this choice lies the fate of our societies, the health of our democracies, and the possibility of a better tomorrow. The question is no longer who will speak the loudest, but who will speak the truest. Who will build on the foundation of reality rather than the sand of illusion. May we all find the courage to seek wisdom in a world that often mistakes noise for knowledge. May we learn to listen deeply, think critically, and act wisely. For in this pursuit lies the hope for a future not defined by the spectacle of ignorance, but by the light of understanding.